Since 2004, Tony Perkins and Family Research Council have championed pastors for the transformation of America. In a recent article about the upcoming elections, the New York Times reported the Family Research Council has already activated its network of 15,000 churches, half of which have culture impact ministries that organize congregations to be more socially and civically engaged. Some of the organizers called themselves the Watchmen on the Wall, a reference to guards who looked over Jerusalem from the book of Isaiah.
When God saw what would happen to Jerusalem, which was the center and the heart of Israel, his people, he said, I will set watchmen on your walls of Jerusalem who will never keep theirs, who will never be silent day or night, but will lift their voice. And I said, as Jerusalem was the center of Israel as a nation, so Washington is the center of America. And so God will be setting spiritual watchmen on the walls of Washington.
It all started when Tony was elected as a Louisiana state legislator and quickly became the leading voice for pro-family policies. As important measures impacting families, churches, and essential freedoms were being debated, there were frequently full-time lobbyists paid by pro-abortion and pro-homosexual, working to undermine and to influence the legislature. There were no lobbyists speaking on behalf of the families and churches of the state. To counteract the one-sided lobbying effort, Tony founded a family policy council, the Louisiana Family Forum, and he began inviting pastors to the Capitol for briefings with lawmakers. And it worked. Louisiana passed the nation's first covenant marriage law and experienced a resurgence of conservative values. When called to lead FRC in Washington, D.C., Tony believed God wanted him to do the same thing on a national level. So, in 2004, FRC hosted the first Watchmen on the Wall conference on Capitol Hill. The Watchman Pastors Network was born just in time to fight for marriage between a man and a woman in states across the country. When it was all said and done, over 30 states had traditional marriage amendments in place. The most publicized battle for marriage protection amendments took place in California with Proposition 8.
Tony, your video of Dave and Tanya Parker from Lexington, Massachusetts, the single most pronounced issue that caused us to win Prop 8 was the issue as it relates to the impact upon public schools and upon children and the loss of parental rights. The key poster child for that became Dave and Tanya Parker in a video that Tony had done that we got circulated so widely. It had, the last few days for the election, over 700,000 hits on that one video alone. That alone could have tipped, and probably likely did tip it, in the favor of truth.
Unfortunately, judges, not the voters, had the final word on marriage. In 2015, the Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision, threw the biblical definition of marriage under the bus.
Just moments ago, the Supreme Court and this landmark ruling, the court making same-sex marriage legal in this country across every state in this nation.
Court-created same-sex marriage not only became the law of the land, the court ruling soon became a license to harass, fine, fire, court-martial, and even jail people of faith who disagree. Watchman pastors and millions of Christians have learned a valuable lesson. It really matters who gets appointed and confirmed to sit on the courts, especially the U.S. Supreme Court, because their decisions have a domino effect in the culture.
The Houston Five, the pastors in Texas that stood up against the mayor, I believe is a turning point for the church in America. And since then, literally dozens of cities across the nation have followed their example and have stood up for religious freedom, the freedom to believe and live one's life according to those beliefs.
No matter what part of the country, there is nobody off the table right now that is not being assaulted by this agenda.
Everybody, Spanish, African American, every nationality has to be together in unity.
If every pastor in this country would stand up, and then every Christian in this country would stand up, things would change very quickly.
The greatest team effort to date was the election of 2016. In Washington, D.C., Tony and FRC worked closely with other Christian organizations to help craft the most conservative policy platform in recent decades.
If there's one person's stamp on this platform, I think it's Tony Perkins.
And Tony was the first FRC president to speak at the GOP convention.
Tonight we focus on making America one again.
Then Watchmen pastors in battleground states networked together to get out record numbers of evangelicals to vote their values in 2016.
You cannot win the presidency, at least in this day and time, without winning the big three. The big three, Ohio and Florida and North Carolina. And in Ohio, we did 9 pastor events, connecting with 1,600 pastors, distributing 800,000 voter guides in the churches, and Trump won by nearly 8% in that state.
80 pastor briefings were held in 15 states. 14 regional and 1 national culture impact training events were held. And over 6 million voter guides were distributed. 1/3 of all events were focused on ethnic pastors. The result?
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
Huge turning point for our country.
The politicians have run Washington for far too long. If you gave in here, then they wanted this, and if you gave in that, they wanted something else. And
I'm just excited for a new start.
At the inauguration, Fox commentator Lou Dobbs had a question for Tony.
Tony Perkins. Tony, great to have you with us. Your thoughts as a pastor yourself and one of the leading evangelicals in the country to hear that this president believes this nation, all of us, will be protected by God. Did you ever think you would hear that from a president of the United States ever again?
Elections have consequences. Whatever you think of the president personally, consider his accomplishments that have advanced Christian values. This president has taken action on causes that many Christians have prayed about for decades. For 15 years, a growing network of now 40,000 Watchmen pastors all across America has become a movement that continues to gain momentum and make a positive difference. We sincerely hope you will prayerfully consider joining with us as we stand for faith, family, and freedom in America and around the world.
This is an opportunity for Christians across America to declare that regardless of what threats we may face collectively or individually, we intend to stand for Jesus Christ and to defend religious freedom here in America.
Well, good evening, everyone. I hope you're enjoying your dinner. And just to think, I never thought I would look at the Capitol Dome and say, sweet. The general gave me that joke, I'm sorry. In fact, I'm going to ask General Boykin to join me here on the stage, as well as my wife. When we began the Watchman on the Wall conference 15 years ago, shortly after I arrived, we did it because we wanted to encourage the pastors of this nation. And some of you have heard my story, but I have a great love and respect for pastors. Born into an unchurched home, I was a little boy. I went to a vacation Bible school in a little small church that had about 75 people. I had such a great time, and of course, when I was little, I was as wide as I was tall, and I loved cookies, and they had great cookies at Vacation Bible School. So never overlook the cookies and refreshments, all right? And I wanted my dad to take me back, and finally he relented and he took me back. And it was a Presbyterian church where not only was everybody on the back row, but nobody was within 10 rows of the front row. And I went down to the front row before my dad could get me, and he sat there the whole time, and he knew that this pastor was reading his mail. He was so under conviction. Well, that pastor came to our house the following night to visit, and there in our living room, both my mother and father gave their heart to Christ. And for nearly 50 years, that pastor pastored that same church, giving his life to a flock that never got bigger than 250 people. I'm the result of a pastor who preached the word unapologetically every Sunday, taught the youth, loved the families, and never compromised. That's why I love pastors. That's the hope of this country, to have the pastors preaching the Word of God. And so when we launched this, we wanted to encourage pastors in their walk, and we wanted to make sure that as pastors came under attack, that those pastors never stood alone. And I remember making a pledge in Dr. Ronnie Floyd's church when he was criticized for preaching a message about political engagement and involvement by Christians, and he was sued by the Americans for the separation of church and state and all other of the leftist groups. And so we had a big event in his church, and we said, never again in America will a pastor who stands up for truth and the love of God and come under attack and stand alone. And so that's become kind of what we do. When a pastor comes under attack, we run to that. And with General Boykin, who joined us 6 years ago at the Family Research Council, who spent 36 and a half years in the United States Army, a founding member of Delta Force, overseeing special operations for the Army, he found the right place at the Family Research Council to come alongside of pastors. And I am so grateful that God has brought him to the Family Research Council. He's an American hero. He's a man who loves God, and I love him and grateful for him. And you can stand a little closer to me. It's all right. But we began giving the Watchman on, not that close. I was in the Marine Corps. You were in the Army. You know, when he's been dealing in this issue in the military with, cross-dressing and transgenders. Back when I was in the Marine Corps, what we considered cross-dressing was someone who got out of the Marine Corps and joined the Army and traded uniforms. But I digress. You can come over here. He said, don't encourage him, don't laugh. I'm going to ask all of our previous Watchmen on the Wall award recipients to stand. I know we have a few of them here. Pastor Steve, I know Harry Jackson was here. Jim Garlow was here. Who else? On page 27, you get a chance in your program, you can actually see all the past recipients. This is one of the highlights of my year, is the Watchman Pastors Conference and what we're about to do right now. And that is to recognize the 2018 Watchman Award recipient. I'm pleased to announce that Pastor Jeremy Sachot, lead pastor of Metro City Church, as the recipient of our 2018 Watchman Award. Pastor Jeremy and his wife Lynette are here, and I'm going to ask Pastor Jeremy if he'll join me and the general here on the stage. bless you, brother. Nearly 20 years ago, God began to put a vision in Jeremy's heart to begin a new work in the greater Detroit area. Since then, Metro City Church, birthed in their living room, has grown into 2 locations and is home to thousands of people. God has blessed Pastor Jeremy's faithfulness to his word. However, Pastor Jeremy and his family and the church came under siege from the LGBTQ community for a workshop that they offered to help adolescent girls answer difficult and sensitive questions on identity and sexuality from a biblical perspective. Pastor Jeremy told me on Washington Watch as this unfolded, he said, people have literally threatened to kill me and my family, to burn our house down, to burn our church down, to assault the people of our church and our staff. At one point, Metro City Church was getting 40 messages a minute. Pastor Jeremy said they had received thousands upon thousands of hate-filled notes 24 hours a day. In fact, one person was arrested after a serious gun threat on their church property. Additionally, 2 Michigan state representatives demanded that the state attorney general launch an investigation into Metro City Church for conversion therapy, seeking to dictate what Jeremy can and cannot teach in his own church. All of this is from the same crowd who preaches tolerance to us. When protest became a mob of hundreds outside the church, Pastor Jeremy and his congregation responded with grace, with love, and with truth. And our own Randy Wilson, our national field director, and Randy, stand up. I mean, you know Randy Wilson? Randy is our special forces. Whenever something happens, we put him on a plane. We don't give him a parachute. We let him land. But we send him into the troubled spots. And he stood with Pastor Jeremy, and he led a couple of press conferences at the Michigan State Capitol. Together with other Michigan pastors, they stood in solidarity with Jeremy, calling out the state representatives and delivering over 20,000 petitions in support of Pastor Jeremy. Despite all the threats, Pastor Jeremy told me, quote, "We're not going anywhere. We will love anybody who walks through our doors. We will not condemn anybody, but we will not back down on what Jesus tells us." And that's why I am pleased to present the 2018 Watchman Award to Pastor Jeremy Sasho.
Thank you. I'm not even sure what to do with something like this.
Well, you could blow it if you know how.
Yeah, no.
And your certificate. We'll take these.
Let's get a picture.
A picture, okay.
God bless you.
Up in here.
Oh. All right, thank you. You know, it's obviously completely humbling, isn't it? Whenever such a great group of people and a great man like Tony recognizes such a simple act of standing for what you believe in. Very humbled. And thank you to the FRC. You guys have been incredible. The whole staff here has been unbelievable. As a matter of fact, whenever you feel in life like there's a great assault coming against you, you often feel alone, don't you? You just feel like you're beaten to the corner. And that's what this whole experience kind of felt like until one day the phone rings and it's Randy and he says, "I'm from the FRC. Do you know who we are?" And I'm like, "Oh, yeah. Yeah, we need you." And Randy says, "We're on our way." And you guys stood by us and our church, and I am so grateful. I am so grateful. Incredible. This whole thing started when, as a church, we decided to do what many of you already decided to do. You decide to help anybody who walks through your doors. In our culture, we reach a lot of young people. And it is very common for 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old kids to ask us questions about sex, sexuality, gender identification, and same-sex attraction issues. Those are real issues in our culture. They're real issues in our world, and we've dealt with these issues forever. Well, for this current year, we had so much interest in this topic that we decided to put together a little workshop. It was really meant to be very simple. Gather 8, 10 young girls together and kind of talk through this issue with their parents' permission, and oftentimes with their parents right there with them. And we made the little mistake of taking an internal promotional piece and put it on our public Facebook page. And I was down in Florida on vacation at the time, and all of a sudden, around 8 o'clock at night, literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of emails, Facebook messages, direct messages started pouring into our system, and I'm trying to get a hold of my assistant and saying, what is going on? What happened? And literally the LGBT community just put out an all-points bulletin and decided that we needed to be taken down. And so it was one insult and one assault after another, and it was harsh and it was devastating, and FRC stood with us. Now, friends, I wasn't looking to pick a fight, and our church was not looking to pick a fight. But I've learned something. When you preach the truth of God's word, the fight will find you. The fight will find you. And it's odd and it's humbling to receive an award for simply standing for what you believe in. We've taught our kids all of our lives, you don't get an award for doing the right thing. You're expected to do the right thing, right? And so it's very, very humbling. And friends, people have been saying, and I appreciate Tony and the team saying, oh, it's an act of courage. I can tell you this was not birthed. Standing in this way was not birthed out of an act of courage at all. It was an act of love, because love without truth is not love, right? And truth without love is not truth. At our church, I was trying to describe it to our people about how love and truth are held in balance with one another. And Jesus modeled this perfectly. And I said it's like a glorious burrito, right? Who does not love a burrito? You mix it all up, you wrap it together in this burrito of love, and it is a glorious, glorious thing, right? That's how we do it in Detroit anyways. I don't know what's wrong with you people, but that's how we do it, right? And so truth and love must be held in a balance. And when you love people with the truth of God, friends, listen, be encouraged with this. Courage flows from that naturally. It just flows from it. It's not a valiant act at all. It is what we do as pastors, and it is what we do as Christians, first and foremost, that we love God and we obey his truth and we share it with the world. Thank you.